Meredith Shaw is a Korea Foundation Fellow and visiting scholar at the Korea Institute for National Unification. And Professor Shaw joins us now to provide more clarity and insight. Morning, Professor Shaw. Let me start by asking you about this new insight or oversight team. Is it going to be effective in monitoring Pyongyang's nuclear and other illegal activities, given that it's no longer, has the legitimacy that's associated with UN backing?
Well, that will remain to be seen. Obviously, we would have liked to see the panel of experts under the UN backing continue, and losing that was a loss to the international cooperation on overseeing sanctions. But it is a sign of higher level of cooperation among the three partners, Japan, the US, and South Korea, which is obviously angering Pyongyang.
Professor, so nuclear and missile threats aside, the U.S. is also concerned about Pyongyang's increasing military support for Moscow, a claim that both deny. But if this is indeed true, how concerning is this? And what's in it for North to support Russia in the Ukraine conflict?
Well, it seems to be hardening this traditional Cold War structure that North Korea and Russia are returning to. The cooperation that North Korea can provide is fairly low level, but things that Russia needs. It needs ammunition, it needs bodies, and apparently there have been some North Koreans killed in Ukraine. So that is worrying evidence that they're sending fighters over, or perhaps people to oversee the ammunition that they're sending. If North Korea becomes this sort of exporter of soldiers, that is another economic avenue that they perhaps haven't opened in the past. The concern going forward is that North Korea is engaging in this heightened war of words and heightened sense of alienation from the previous cooperation that it had been attempting with the previous Moon administration in Seoul, and now seems to be hardening its alignment with Russia against Ukraine, which is a country that it hasn't obviously got much of a bone to pick with in the past, and it's hardening those alliances.
And Professor, on the Korean Peninsula, we know that North Korea just blew up roads, railways to the south. We know that tensions have been much worse before, but just how significant is the latest escalation of tensions? And is this the familiar cycle of, provocation, crisis, negotiations, and reconciliation, and then provocation back again?
Well, in some ways, yes, it is something that we've seen before, but there has been a serious escalating tit-for-tat in the last 4 or 5 months, between Pyongyang sending these trash balloons to Seoul, and Seoul restarting its loudspeaker broadcast into the north, which North Korea really, really doesn't like. And then, Seoul having this greater military and security cooperation with Japan and the US. And so this, in some ways, seems to be a continuation of that. It might be seen as a rather low stakes reaction, since it's just blowing up lines that were not used. But these roads were symbols of cooperation and the prospect of inter-Korean detente that was so promising under the previous Moon administration. So it's a very visual, symbolic way of showing the South that North Korea is no longer interested in that kind of detente. North Korea does like blowing things up. They previously blew up the liaison office that had been set up in 2018. They blew it up 2 years later when relations soured. And they also blew up a unification arch that had been a symbol of unification in their on the road to South Korea earlier this year.
But has Kim Jong-un truly abandoned reunification? I mean, I hear you about the symbolism. I mean, and he said so earlier this year as well. But these are long-held goals, you know, that his father and his grandfather had. So is he here perhaps also trying to bypass Seoul and get the U.S. back to the negotiating table?
Well, if he is, it's a strange way to do it. I think these sort of symbolic detonations are showing that he is very angered by the loss of what he sees as the loss of faith, because the previous president was so friendly to him, and this president is not friendly to him in Seoul. And it's hard to see how North Korea gains anything from this sort of brinkmanship. It's not the same as when they test a nuclear weapon or launch a missile and everyone sits up and pays attention. It seems to be just a fit of pique. It's hard to see how that would bring the U.S. back to the negotiating table.
And is there a message to North Koreans and possibly South Koreans as well?
Well, there's most of what North Korea does is a message to its own people. The North has been trying to sever this idea of national ethnic homogeneity or ethnic brotherhood since the beginning of this year, and it's hard to overstate how significant of a change that is from the previous, as you mentioned, the previous two leaders, the father and grandfather of the current leader, who always emphasized that unification is the end goal, and all Koreans are brothers, and we have to save our brethren in the South. So tearing down all of that rhetoric and all of the symbolic statues and songs and everything attached to that is quite an endeavor for North Korea. And this can be seen as an extension of that. Toward South Korea, they are showing their displeasure at several things that South Korea has done recently in terms of trying to send messages to the North Korean people through radio and through loudspeaker broadcasts and through leaflets, and also the greater cooperation with the U.S. and Japan, the trilateral cooperation.
Professor Shaw, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. That was Meredith Shaw, Korea Foundation Fellow and also visiting scholar at the Korea Institute for National Unification.